Welcome to our deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at agricultural technology.
Ooh, very interesting.
It's a pretty fascinating topic. And, we're talking about thousands of years of history here.
Thousands, yeah.
From very basic tools to like the incredibly complex systems that we see today.
Right.
We'll be taking a look at a book called The Evolution of Agricultural Technology by Paula Johansson.
Okay.
It was copyright 2019.
All right.
And I think you guys are going to find some of this stuff really surprising. Like, did you know that beer
Oh, yeah.
might have actually played a crucial role in the rise of early cities?
It's true.
Really?
It's true.
Wow.
Yeah, we tend to think of agriculture as, starting with farms and fields.
Right.
But it really began with this very slow shift in how humans interacted with the environment around them.
So it wasn't just like one day everybody decided to start planting crops.
Not at all.
Okay.
For most of human history, we were hunter-gatherers.
Right.
And
Yeah.
sure. And the transition to farming was really gradual. It happened over thousands of years.
Thousands of years.
And it involved
Cool.
both natural and human selection, which is interesting.
Okay, so how did this whole natural selection thing work when we're talking about plants?
Well, imagine early humans discarding food scraps, right? Like
Right.
scattering seeds near their settlements, just, wherever they were living.
Right.
Over time, the plants that thrived in those conditions,
Okay.
maybe they produced larger seeds or were more drought resistant.
Uh-huh.
Those were the ones that humans were more likely to keep eating. And
That makes
so
sense.
without even realizing it,
Yeah.
they were encouraging certain plants to flourish.
So basically, like the tastiest and most resilient plants just kind of won out over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then humans started intentionally saving seeds from the best plants for the next harvest,
Right.
right? And this deliberate selection is what we call artificial selection.
Okay.
That accelerated the process even further, leading to crops that were noticeably different. Yeah.
From their wild ancestors.
And it wasn't just plants, right? We also domesticated animals.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Early humans started noticing that some animals were just easier to manage than others.
Right.
They might have been less aggressive or had a natural tendency to herd together.
Okay.
And by selectively breeding these animals,
Yeah.
they encouraged traits like docility
Right.
and size.
Okay.
And that's how we got domesticated animals like sheep and goats.
That makes sense. But where did this whole agricultural revolution really take off?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
The book mentions the Fertile Crescent.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. What's so special about that region?
Well, the Fertile Crescent, which
Mhm.
spans parts of the Middle East, is considered the cradle of civilization.
Wow.
And for good reason. It had the perfect combination of domesticable plants and animals,
Okay.
a favorable climate,
Right?
and access to water.
Uh-huh.
And this is where we see the emergence of complex societies,
Wow.
large-scale agriculture.
Okay.
And all right, so back to the beer.
Back to the beer.
How did that fit into all of this?
Well, think about early cities.
Okay.
Lots of people living in close quarters.
Yeah,
Clean water was a major challenge back then.
I bet.
Beer, because it was boiled during the brewing process, was actually safer to drink
Wow.
than water.
Really?
So it might have been a safer beverage, and the grain needed for brewing encouraged more organized agriculture.
So a good brew might have been like the key to survival back then.
Maybe.
Wow.
Makes you wonder if those early brewers knew they were onto something big.
Yeah, they probably didn't.
Probably not consciously, but their innovation had this ripple effect on society,
Yeah.
impacting everything from health to social gatherings to the growth of cities.
So while the Fertile Crescent was like really bustling, what was going on in other parts of the world? Were people farming elsewhere too?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Across the globe, people were developing their own unique agricultural practices.
Right.
The Americas, for instance,
Yeah.
were home to diverse and sophisticated agricultural systems.
I've heard about the Three Sisters planting method. What is that?
Well, that's a great example of companion planting.
Companion planting.
Native American farmers would plant corn beans and squash together.
Okay.
The corn stalks provided support for the beans to climb.
Okay.
The beans, in turn, would fix nitrogen into the soil, benefiting all three plants.
And hold on. Fixed nitrogen. What does that mean?
That's a good question. Nitrogen is essential for plant growth.
Right.
But plants can't just use the nitrogen gas that makes up most of our atmosphere.
Oh.
They need it in a different form.
Okay.
Certain bacteria, like the ones that live on bean roots,
Uh-huh.
can convert atmospheric nitrogen
Okay.
into a form that plants can use, enriching the soil.
So the beans were like tiny little fertilizer factories.
Kind of, yeah.
Wow, that's cool. And what about the squash?
The large squash leaves acted as living mulch,
Okay.
shading the ground to suppress weeds and help retain moisture.
So it was all working together?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Together, these three sisters created this thriving little mini ecosystem,
Wow.
providing a balanced diet for the people who cultivated them.
This is giving me a whole new respect for like Native American ingenuity.
Yeah.
They really understood how to work with nature.
Absolutely. Their understanding of ecology and sustainability is something that we can still learn from today.
Yeah.
They managed to create these thriving agricultural systems even without large draft animals or the metal plows that were becoming common in other parts of the world.
It sounds like they were masters of adapting to their environments.
Uh,
I'm guessing the development of tools played a big role in the evolution of agriculture everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Early tools like digging sticks and sickles made from stone or bone
Okay.
were crucial for early farmers. Over time, these tools became more sophisticated.
Right.
The invention of the plow, for example, really revolutionized farming
Wow.
by allowing for deeper tilling of the soil.
I bet the invention of the wheel was a game changer too.
You're right. The wheel, along with advancements in animal harnesses, made it possible to transport larger harvests and
Right.
work larger areas of land.
Yeah.
These innovations, along with the development of irrigation systems,
Right.
really set the stage for larger settlements and rise of civilizations.
Speaking of irrigation, we talked about how important it was in the Fertile Crescent. Did other cultures develop their own unique irrigation techniques?
Definitely in the Americas, for example.
No.
Native American farmers in arid regions
Okay.
developed really intricate systems of canals and ditches
Oh,
to divert water from rivers and streams to their fields.
really?
They also used techniques like dry farming,
Okay.
which involved carefully selecting drought-resistant crops and using strategies to conserve moisture in the soil.
So even in like challenging environments, people found ways to innovate and thrive.
They did.
It's amazing to think about the sheer amount of human ingenuity and perseverance that went into developing agriculture.
It's a testament to the human spirit and our ability to solve problems and adapt to different environments.
Yeah.
And these early innovations laid the foundation for even more dramatic changes that were to come.
Which brings us to the mechanization of agriculture.
Huh.
The book talks about this as like a major turning point.
It was a turning point for sure, the introduction of machines like the seed drill, the reaper,
Right.
and eventually the tractor
Yeah.
transformed farming from a labor-intensive endeavor to a more efficient and productive industry.
But I imagine there was a downside to all of this industrialization of agriculture.
There was.
Yeah.
You hit on a crucial point.
I'm thinking about things like factory farming.
Right.
Yeah.
While mechanization brought undeniable benefits, it also led to practices
Right.
that raised concerns about animal welfare and environmental sustainability.
Yeah.
The rise of factory farms, for example, allowed for the mass production of meat,
Right.
but often at the expense of animal well-being and with a significant environmental footprint.
It seems like with every like technological advancement,
Yeah.
there's this trade-off.
There is.
We gain efficiency, but sometimes at a cost.
That's right. That tension between progress and its unintended consequences
Yeah.
has been a constant throughout the history of agriculture.
Right.
It's something we need to be mindful of
Absolutely.
as we continue to develop new technologies.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already. From those first tentative steps towards farming
Right.
to the rise of industrial agriculture.
Yeah.
And there's still so much more to explore.
Indeed, the story of agricultural technology doesn't end there.
Right.
The next chapter involves a leap into the world of genetics,
Ooh.
where we'll learn how humans have taken manipulation of nature to a whole new level.
All right. This is where things get really interesting and maybe a little controversial.
Yeah.
We're talking about GMOs, right?
Exactly. The development of genetically modified organisms
Yeah.
represents a radical departure from traditional breeding methods.
Right.
It's a technology that has the potential to both solve and create problems.
Okay. Well, before we dive into that fascinating and complex world, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far. Take
Okay.
from the Fertile Crescent to the Americas.
Right.
Humans have been innovating and adapting their agricultural practices for millennia,
It's true.
but each step forward seems to come with its own set of challenges.
It's a story of ingenuity and adaptation, but also of unintended consequences and the need to constantly reassess our relationship with the natural world.
Right.
And as we'll see, that need for careful consideration becomes even more crucial as we enter the era of genetic modification.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome back to our deep dive into agricultural technology. So before we jump into GMOs, let's take a step back and talk about selective breeding for a minute.
Okay, so we've been selectively breeding plants and animals for like centuries,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's how we got from like wild grasses to the wheat that we use for bread today,
Right.
or from wolves to like all the different types of dogs we see today.
Exactly. Humans have been shaping the genetic makeup of plants and animals for millennia,
Right.
but always through natural processes, We choose individuals with desirable traits and breed them together, hoping that those traits will be passed on to their offspring.
It's amazing how much we were able to change plants and animals just through careful like observation and selection.
Yeah.
But GMOs take this to like a whole other level, right?
Absolutely. With GMOs, scientists can directly insert genes from one organism into another.
Wow.
So instead of waiting for like generations of selective breeding,
Right.
they can make very specific changes to an organism's DNA in a single generation.
It sounds like something out of science fiction, but the book explains that the goals of genetic modification are often very practical.
Right. One of the main goals is to make crops more resistant to pests or diseases.
Okay.
And this can reduce the need for pesticides, which can have negative environmental impacts.
So GMOs could actually be good for the environment.
Potentially.
Yes.
There are also GMOs that are designed to increase yields,
Right.
which could help us feed a growing global population with less land.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there are even GMOs that have been modified to enhance nutritional value,
Right.
like golden rice, which is engineered to produce vitamin A.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So there are definitely some potential benefits to GMOs,
Right,
but the book also mentions that there's a lot of controversy surrounding this technology.
that's true.
Why is that?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is the potential for unintended consequences.
Okay.
Like, what happens if these modified genes spread to wild populations?
Uh,
Would we end up with, like, superweeds that are resistant to herbicides?
that's kind of a scary thought.
It is a concern.
And what about the long-term health effects of consuming GMOs? Like, have we done enough research to know that they're safe?
Those are questions that scientists are still studying.
Right.
There's a lot of debate about the potential risks of GMOs,
Yeah.
and more research is definitely needed.
The book also touches on the issue of corporate control over the food supply.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about companies like Monsanto that have faced a lot of criticism for their business practices.
Yeah. The role of large corporations in the development and distribution of GMOs is a complex and often contentious issue.
Right.
There are concerns about farmers becoming dependent on patented seeds
Mm-hmm.
and the potential for these companies to exert too much influence over the food system.
So it sounds like GMOs are this really powerful tool
Yeah,
with both the potential to solve problems,
right.
but also create new ones.
That's a good way to put it. The debate surrounding GMOs is far from settled,
Yeah.
and it's important to consider both the potential benefits and risks of this technology.
This has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Good.
But even with all these incredible advancements in agricultural technology, we're still facing some pretty big challenges, aren't we?
We are. We've come a long way from those early days of farming,
Right.
but we still haven't solved the problem of food insecurity.
Right.
Despite producing enough food to feed everyone on the planet,
Yeah.
millions of people still go hungry.
Why is that? I thought we had figured out how to produce enough food for everyone.
Well, the issue isn't just about production.
Mhm.
It's about distribution, access, and affordability.
Okay.
There are many factors that contribute to food insecurity, including poverty, conflict, and lack of infrastructure.
So even if we have enough food, it doesn't mean it's getting to the people who need it most.
Exactly. And climate change is adding another layer of complexity,
Right.
disrupting growing seasons,
Mhm.
making it even harder to produce food in some parts of the world.
This is where I start to feel a bit overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like we have all this amazing technology, but we're still struggling to feed everyone. Like, is there any hope for the future?
There's always hope.
Okay.
And technology might actually be a part of the solution. The book talks about the potential of e-agriculture.
E-agriculture.
Yeah, what is that?
Which uses things like sensors, drones, and data analysis to make farming more efficient and sustainable.
That sounds futuristic.
It is. Imagine farmers using like real-time data to monitor soil conditions,
Wow.
water usage, and crop health.
This could help them make better decisions about when to irrigate, fertilize, and harvest,
Right.
reducing waste and maximizing yields.
So instead of relying on guesswork,
Right.
They can use data to make more informed choices.
Exactly.
What other cool things can e-agriculture do?
Well, drones equipped with cameras can survey fields,
Okay.
identifying areas where pests or diseases are present,
Uh-huh.
and this allows farmers to target their treatments more precisely,
Right.
reducing the need to spray entire fields with pesticides.
Wow, that sounds incredibly efficient. But what about the cost of all this technology? Can small farmers afford to adopt these systems?
That's an important consideration. The cost of technology can be a barrier for some farmers,
Yeah.
but there are initiatives underway to make these tools more accessible,
Okay.
and the long-term benefits may outweigh the initial investment.
It sounds like e-agriculture has the potential to revolutionize farming,
Mm.
but I imagine it probably comes with its own set of challenges too.
You're right, there are concerns about data privacy,
Right.
the digital divide. Uh-huh.
And the potential displacement of farm workers.
Uh-huh.
But it's a really exciting area with the potential to address some of the biggest challenges facing agriculture today.
This whole deep dive has been a whirlwind of information.
That has.
We've gone from ancient farming techniques to high-tech solutions.
We have.
But in the end, it seems like the biggest question is how do we use all this knowledge to create a food system that's both productive and sustainable?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is,
And it's not just up to farmers and scientists to answer it.
right?
We all have a role to play as consumers, making informed choices about the food we eat and supporting practices that align with our values.
So what does that look like in practice? How can we as individuals make a difference?
Well, for starters, we can be more mindful of where our food comes from and how it's produced.
Okay.
We can support local farmers,
Right.
reduce food waste, and make conscious choices about the products we buy.
Those are all great ideas, but it can be hard to know where to start. Do you have any specific tips for our listeners? Absolutely. We'll dive into those in just a moment, but first let's take a quick break to let all this information sink in. When we come back, we'll explore some practical ways you can put this knowledge into action and become a more informed and empowered eater.
Welcome back to our deep dive into agricultural technology. We've explored the past, present, and potential future of how humans produce food, and as we've seen, it's a really complex and evolving story.
It is a complex story and one that we're all a part of,
Right.
whether we realize it or not.
Okay, so before the break, you mentioned that we all have a role to play as consumers.
We do.
What does that look like in practice?
Okay.
I'm not a farmer or a scientist, but I still want to make a difference.
You absolutely can. It starts with being a more conscious consumer.
Right.
You know, what we choose to eat, where we buy our food, how much we're willing to pay.
Right.
All of that sends signals to producers and influences the direction of agriculture.
So we're not just passive bystanders. We
Yeah.
actually have some power to shape the system.
Exactly. And with that power comes responsibility. Think about it this way. Every time you buy food, you're casting a vote for the kind of agriculture you want to support.
That's a great way to put it.
Mm.
But with so many choices and so much information out there, it can be hard to know where to start. Do you have any practical tips for our listeners?
Absolutely. One of the simplest things you can do is support local farmers.
Oh.
Shopping at farmers markets or joining a community-supported agriculture program, a CSA program,
Right.
allows you to buy directly from the people who grow your food.
I've been to a few farmers markets, and the produce is always so fresh and delicious. Plus, it's a great way to connect with the people who are actually growing your food.
It is, and by buying local, you're also reducing the distance your food has to travel, which lowers your carbon footprint.
Makes sense. What about all the labels we see at the grocery store? Organic, non-GMO, fair trade. It can be kind of overwhelming.
It can be, but those labels provide valuable information.
Yeah.
You know, if you're concerned about the use of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers, choosing organic products can be a good option.
I've heard that organic food is more expensive, though. Is that always the case?
It can be, but not always. And remember, the price of conventional food doesn't always reflect the true cost.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
we're often paying for those lower prices with environmental damage and health problems down the line.
That's a good point.
Yes.
So buying organic when possible can be a way to invest in our health and the health of the planet. But what about GMOs? Is it always best to avoid them?
Well, the GMO debate is complex and there's no easy answer.
Right.
If you're concerned about GMOs, buying certified non-GMO products is a way to exercise your choice, but it's also important to do your research and understand the different perspectives on this issue.
Okay, so we've talked about buying local, considering organic, and navigating the GMO landscape. What else can we do to be more responsible eaters?
One of the biggest things you can do is reduce food waste.
Okay.
Did you know that a huge percentage of the food we produce ends up in landfills?
I've heard that, but it's still kind of shocking.
It is.
What are some practical ways to reduce food waste?
Well, it starts with planning your meals and only buying what you need.
Okay.
Store food properly to prevent spoilage and get creative with leftovers.
Yeah,
There are tons of recipes online for using up those odds and ends in your fridge.
those are great tips. I'm definitely guilty of letting food go bad in the fridge. I need to work on that.
We all do.
Yeah.
Even small changes can make a big difference. And speaking of small changes, remember that you don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you need to overhaul your entire diet overnight.
That's reassuring to hear. It's easy to get overwhelmed and feel like you have to do everything perfectly.
It's about making gradual, sustainable changes that align with your values and lifestyle. Maybe you start by trying a new vegetable each week or cutting back on your meat consumption 1 day a week.
I like the idea of taking small steps. It feels more manageable and less intimidating. So it's about making informed choices, supporting sustainable practices, and remembering that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of food.
That's a great summary. And don't underestimate the power of your voice. Talk to your friends and family about these issues. Support policies that promote sustainable agriculture. And let businesses know that you care about where your food comes from.
We started this deep dive by exploring the history of agricultural technology. But it seems like the most important takeaway is that the future of food is really in our hands.
It really is. And that's both exciting and empowering by being conscious consumers. We can help create a food system that nourishes both people and the planet.
Thank you for taking us on this incredible journey. We've learned so much about the past, present, and potential future of food production, and most importantly, we've learned that we all have the power to make a difference.
It's been my pleasure. I hope this deep dive has inspired you to think differently about the food you eat and the choices you make. Remember, every bite is a vote for the kind of world you want to create.
Well said to our listeners. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of agricultural technology. We hope you've come away with a newfound appreciation for the complexity of our food system and the power we hold as individuals to shape its future. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.